So that is just a little lead-in to our speaker, Paul Tomlinson. Paul has worked with executives all over the place. Master's degree in psychology.
Don't talk about that.
Don't talk about that. Okay. Conflict. How a man handles conflict. You want to talk about that, or?
I'm a carrier.
You're a carrier. In 1991, Paul founded the Career Life Institute. He provides coaching, organizational design, and career transition. So career transition seems to be a theme here. He's worked in a variety of contexts, and he's taken about 12 trips over to Ethiopia to do work over there. Many years ago, Paul really helped a friend of mine. Do you remember Keith Cupp? Keith was looking for a job. Paul was really connected up around the city and helped Keith transition into his next job. I've known Paul for a long time. Just really appreciate who you are. And Paul has a raving fan in Spokane also. Keith? When I was going to Spokane taking some trips, I connected up with Keith over there. So these two guys were raving about each other. So, Paul, come up and share with us.
So, do any of you know who Yogi Berra is?
Yeah.
You know, at my age, you tell jokes, and you tell about, like, the Beatles, and my grandson says, who? But Yogi Berra said, when you come to the fork in the road, take it. He also said, if you don't know where you're going, you may end up someplace else. So there's a little bit about, he was a famous baseball player for some of you young people that don't know that. And what I've had the privilege over the years is to have a lot of transitions in my life. I went to Washington State University.
Oh, no.
I know. And I set out to be a baseball player. And in the transition, nobody, after my career was over in college, nobody would sign me. So I went in the Army. Then I got a real job after I got out of the Army. And then I ended up at a bank. Doing human resource work. Then I ended up at an NGO, Christa Ministries out here, and I was an executive. Then I went into my own business and failed. And then I had a miracle thing happen, and a guy came along and said, I'll teach you a new business and pay for your master's degree and buy your worthless business. So that was a nice transition.
Oh.
And I did that for 10 years, and then I went into my own business, which I've been doing since '91. Now, there's been a lot of roles in that, but have there been any real transitions? And my wife would tell you that I've had more transitions than Clark Kent in a phone booth. Some of you will get that. Some of but what I'd like to do today is to give a framework about transitions. And we got things. Did y'all bring pins? Just in case, I got you the ugliest color possible so that you won't throw it away. White stuff you can just throw away. But I've got some things I'd like to talk about, and then I want you to share, because as I look in this audience, I think each one of you could be up here speaking about what are new knees like? That's a big transition, right?
Yeah, they're amazing, and it was a hard work.
It still is.
Yes, it is.
Yep. And so I want to do maybe a little bit more sharing than usual, but as I've transitioned, and when you get this, we'll fill in. I'll wait till everybody's got theirs. But we often have roles, but then there's true transitions in our life. And my background in the last few years, as John said, has been a life coach of working with people who are looking to make a change. And my wife and I have been doing pre-marriage counseling for 20 years. We do marriage. We don't call it counseling now, but we do marriage mentoring. And at this stage of life, we do it for free because there are a lot of people that can't afford it. And in my own life, I've kind of transitioned from actually getting paid for what I do to doing mostly free nonprofit stuff. And that's been a nice transition for us. God's blessed us with enough things that we can really give back at this point in our life. So it's been a true transition for us. But what I want to talk, you've all got the yellow sheet. I think that transition for us, for my wife and I over the years, has been one frame of reference going to another frame of reference. And who has the 16-year-old? Bless your brother. Our grandchild just started driving. 16, right? In fact, on my phone this morning, he's got a broken window, and he said, "Grandpa, can you fix this?" It's in the car. So, but a frame of reference is something that when we're making a transition, a lot of things change. And so on your next thing down, I think there's 4 things that go with the frame of reference. And I use this in consulting. We use it in marriage, but my wife and I use it with each other. And that is, it starts with kind of a pyramid with value being the first one. What do you value in life? I valued making money when I needed to pay the rent and do everything when I was actually working for a living. I mean, and I valued work. I valued money a little bit differently than how I value it now. But you go through that, and so we have to decide, what do we value when we go through transition? And so over the years, I've had, family, kids growing up, there's a lot of different values that hit us, so we go through that transition period. The next step is your thinking. You think about what you value. And so I valued independence when I was about, I think, was I 60 when I went into I was 50 when I went into my own business. And what I valued was independence and being able to serve, and I was working for a large international consulting company. And so with 2 kids in a private college, 1 getting ready to go, a non-compete, I left my organization. Because what I valued at that time, I really thought God was leading me in one direction. And so with all of that, making 6 figures, I went from 6 figures to 0. 2 kids in college, and say, how is this going to work? Well, that wasn't just a role change. That was a transition of going to working for somebody to something else. But it impacted the family and everybody else. And at that point in time, there was some emotion that went with that. And I thought my wife would be more emotional than I was, but it's not true. She said, let's just do it and see what happens. And so the third step that you fill out is that what we value, thinking, and then our emotions usually follow our thinking. And then our actions follow our emotions. Now, that's not true in every case, because sometimes people jump around. But in general, if you will follow this, and you're getting ready to make a transition, and what I did when I went into my own business was that all lined up from that standpoint, that I had to say, what was my thinking? What do I really want to do here? And my emotion was, can I do it? And we'll talk about that in a minute, because go down to the next list on your thing is, what triggers transition? In your life right now, what are some things that could possibly trigger transition?
Stuff happens.
Pardon?
Stuff happens. Stuff happens.
Stuff happens. Okay, so you should be up here. The first thing you want to write down is events. Events in your life change. The second thing, what else? What else? Who in your...
Opportunities?
Opportunities, okay. What could that be? That's an idea. How many of you start a business based on an idea? Okay. How many of you ever got married based on an idea? I think I like her. So that's another thing. The third thing is emotion. I work with a lot of homeless men. And a lot of homeless men they've made some transitions in their life because they drank too much, they had addictions, or they hurt somebody, or sometimes we make decisions on emotion, and there can be good emotion, and that is, I'm really excited. And I have an idea, I'm excited, so you put those 2 things together. Did you launch a business that way?
Yes.
What did it start with, an idea?
An idea.
Okay.
It started with an idea.
And how did that idea develop?
It kind of came down from up there into my head.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, the idea started formulating and started writing it down.
You started writing down.
Yeah.
And why I'm kind of going through this overview very quickly is that this is a process that you can take people through as well as you look at yourself, and this is what I do as a life coach. So I hope I'm not doing too much teaching, but this is what I've learned in my own life. I think that's what John told me to say here. The last thing is encouragement. When I was getting ready to transition into my own career, I was looking for something that was here, and a man came to me, and he was a life coach and a golf coach, actually. He has a few people on the tour right now. And he said, Paul, you're worth 6 figures. You are thinking down here. Now, it had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with my trust and my abilities and what I had to do. So is there somebody in here who's had somebody that's encouraged you and said 1 or 2 things? Can you think of one person that's encouraged you? Ian, who is it?
Oh, probably the most encouraging was my father. So.
Okay. Your father.
Yeah.
Anybody else have that? Yep. That encouragement, that is what starts transition for a lot of people, is that you've been encouraged to do something you didn't think you could do, or you do that in somebody else's life. And I think that's the key to that. What's your transition approach? That's the next one. 3 things. You can reject, embrace, or ignore. Those are the 3. Reject, embrace, or ignore transition. And some people will say, not now, and it's okay. Transition isn't ready. When I was getting ready to go into my own business, I wanted to go a year before I actually did. And my wife said, you know, I'll support you, but I think we should wait a year. And maybe we should save up a little bit more money because we're going to do this crazy thing. And in so doing, there was a guy named Larry Burkett. I don't know, he was a financial planner and an advisor. And a year, while we were in this year waiting, he sent out an email, said that he was going to start a career program. And so he needed some help. And so by waiting a year, I went down, I had lunch with him, I was on his radio program here in Seattle at the tail end, and I just got hundreds of calls. Because by waiting a year, it was the right kind. So sometimes it's okay to wait. There are some people that ignore transition and said it's coming. If you ignore your teenage son, what's going to happen? He's going to be 16. He's going to do some things. So you have to prepare your thinking and your emotion to go with that to deal with a 16-year-old. You're going to have to let go a little bit. Is that hard?
Absolutely.
I've had a lot of executives I've worked with who said, I stayed too long. Do anybody know anybody like that? I stayed with an organization too. I know when you started your business, was that hard to start your business? Yeah. Because you must have, you had to make a decision, right?
Well, I mean, I know what my father did, but then I've also started a couple too, but very hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, extremely hard. So many things that you account for, and then none of those happen.
Yeah. But I think embracing transition is the message today. That I got this telephone. My son buys phones for T-Mobile, so I get phones that I take a couple to Ethiopia here and there and stuff when I go. But the idea that it's going so fast. I bet some of you have trouble keeping up with the pace of transition. But we have to embrace it. So I've got an iPad and a phone and social media. I got a Facebook page and all. I hate all that stuff actually, but I got all that. Right? Do you have a Facebook page, Wai Chung? You do. He's got SC everywhere. The whole world's got it. So my wife and I were in Ethiopia, and I've done a lot of transitional work with Ethiopians and microfinance and prisons and schools, and so we're doing some preventive health up in the mountains. And it's called the CHE program, Community Health Evangelism, Community Health Education, and teaching people just to drink latrines and do things. And so she's sitting in this big house, and there's a cow in this room right over here in the house, and there's a fire in the fireplace, and they're talking about preventive health, and there's a chicken walking across my wife's feet, and a cell phone rings. She said, "It's surreal." So we need to know when to reject transition or to let it go, but we can't ignore it. But a lot of people in the outplacement business, and I've worked with hundreds of executives and middle managers and union workers who've gotten laid off, and they said, I should have moved. I should have done something. I waited probably 5 years too long to go into my own business, but I was afraid, or not afraid, but I wasn't ready to take the risk at that time. But I think it worked out okay. So sometimes we have to balance that. And then lastly, there's 6 areas that we work in transition. That's work, our work transition, relationships, money, health, leisure, and spiritual. I think about it for a minute. Is there anything else we leave out of that? I mean, that very much covers most of it. And at some time, you may be going through 2 or 3 of these at the same time. This in 2007, 2008, I worked with so many people that were out of work, and there was an event. What happened? You know, everything crashed. Did anybody get caught up in that? Anybody lose a job in this room? Yeah. Yeah.
Job.
Yeah, a lot of business went down. So there was an event that took place that really impacted a lot of things. And so in my life, all of these things started going on. And at one point, when I went in my own business, all 6 of these were in play because it impacted what I do with my kids, my wife, and that kind of thing. And so I think one of the things that we try to do in transition is to have there's 7 steps in it. I'm going to quickly go through them, and then I want to have a discussion here. John, what time are we through here? About
8:20.
8:20. Okay. The first thing we do is in transition, and as being a consultant, you got to have some kind of a process, or you can't make money, right? You consult. Is anticipation. Is that idea. Let's anticipate that change is going to come, and let's embrace it. And in one of these 6 areas, it's going to hit. For me, I had 3 teenagers at one time, so I'll relate to that. You know, the idea that I'm going to have to change how I think with those kids. My thinking had to change, and certainly my emotion. The second thing is to review reason and rationale. When I was leaving this job, a nice job and a non-compete, I bet you I talked to 100 people to get an idea. What's the rationale? Is this right? One of the things I see with men is they don't talk to people, and when they're making a transition, they just do. They don't have trusted people that they can go to. I think that's really important. You ladies, you guys maybe are a little different than that, maybe not. But when you went in your own business, I bet you talked to a lot of people, right? You started to get the rationale for what you wanted to do. And in my case, I was doing it for the right reason. My wife and I do a lot of marriage mentoring, and there are a lot of marriages in trouble today, both in the church and outside of the church. And so the idea of saying, well, review reason, why are we in this marriage in the first place? Why am I in job? Why am I doing this job? Or why do I want to change? And the idea is to get some facts around that, and that's really helpful. The third thing is to look at yourself. There's 3 things I found out about myself. I was prideful, I needed a lot of attention, and I looked at what my strengths and weaknesses were when I went into my own business, and boy, that was really interesting. And Jay, as a life coach, there's a lot of people come to you that want to start looking at themselves, right? There's a very famous person here in town who, if I told you his name, you'd probably know him. And he came to me when his career was pretty, he'd made a lot of money, been a big name. And he said, "What do I do now? Do I build a statue to myself, or what do I do?" But he was he's very wealthy, very wise. But he said, "I need to look at so we got a whiteboard." I said, "Let's put up a whiteboard and let's do the old Ben Franklin. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses?" kind of thing. And we just went through that. And he decided to stay in the business that he was in, because he said, "I don't want to give up," because we go back to the idea of what he valued, what he thought, and his emotions. It said, "I should stay." So he basically embraced change by not changing. So his transition was to stay where he was. That was a good choice. The fourth point is a point of decision. There's a great consultant in town called Ralph Bruxus. He's been around forever. And he gave a speech once that stuck with me, is try never to make a decision at the point of decision. See what that says? That's really helped me. Try to do the first 3 steps before, I think Jay and I probably both have run into guys that are ready, shoot, aim. And I've been there myself a couple of times. And there's other people that are ready, aim, shoot. So it takes forever to make that decision. But try to get the information, and then you act on it. When I went into my own business, I actually had to resign the other business, say, "Hey guys, I'm leaving." I had to get an office space, and then I agonized over whether to have 3 phone lines or 2 phone lines. Now my wife, who's very practical, said, "Well, you dummy, if you don't get enough calls, take 1 line out," right? What I like is the value, think, emotions, and actions. What do you value today? And this is, my wife and I have learned that the toughest lessons that you learn in life sometimes are the ones you already thought you knew. So we're continuing to go through transitions. I turned 75 this year, and I'm actually making a new plan for what I'm going to be doing. This is the first year I probably won't have any for-profit income in my business. My nonprofit, that's where I do most of my work. I go to Ethiopia. I found out that Ethiopians go through this 7 steps in our microfinance that we did. They have to go through all of this. I've got a guy that wants me to help him do a chicken farm over in Ethiopia right now. Well, I'm making him go through these steps. And I think he can do it because he's going to transition from being unemployed basically to having a chicken farm. And the women that we started off with 100 women in microfinance. And so we made them kind of go through, well, what's important and what do you have to do to transition from just relying on the little things you can do to actually run a business. And it became a mind thing for them that we can do this. But they had to be challenged, and we actually had to put people with them. And now there are 2,000 women with $250,000 in the bank. And one of the only successful microfinance places in Ethiopia of groups, because the people in Spokane that ran that, was Keith and that group, they brought all of this into place that encouraged people, but to make them evaluate what's important. Because for a while it was just the kids were important. Let's clothe the kids. And we said, no, there's a longer term. You have to save money. And you have to put it away. Well, that was a transition for them of going to the immediate to the longer term. We work with about 300 homeless men in Bellevue. You say, hey, there aren't that many in Bellevue. Yes, there are. Right now they're sleeping behind bins down behind Starbucks by Barnes & Noble. And getting them to go from short-term thinking to long-term thinking is important. And Paul Reed, that's what you do. You get people financially to think from short-term to a little bit longer term. Is that right?
Right.
So there's the transition that we're going through here. These are kind of the steps. Now I'd like to kind of open it for a minute and say, of what I just talked about, what relates to you? What was helpful in what we talked about, and what can you add to that? Because you guys are experts in transition here. Jay, I'd like to hear from you.
Well, on the spot. Well, I was just thinking about my transition from New York to the Northwest last year, and there was one element of transition which was struggle. I struggled with that decision for a good 6 months.
To come from New York to here.
Yeah. Of course, now looking back at it, looking at the weather back east, I'm really happy that I did. That's the payoff. But there was a struggle, and I think I went through these 6 steps at least 3 or 4 times before I had before I kind of made that move. But it's something that's got more difficult as I get a bit older. The transition. When I was young, I was just pack a suitcase and be in a new city the next day.
Right.
So I guess the years make it a bit more difficult to make those transitions. But I'm happy that.
See, that's good, because I think as we get older, life changes a little bit. And it does take longer, and maybe it's wise to take longer. In some cases, I've dealt with a lot of people, all of a sudden they ended up with cancer. So what do I do? Now you start thinking short term, or do you still think long term? But that was a good 6 months for you, though. You thought through it, right?
I had 2 coaches.
Yeah, 2
They both failed.
I think that in transition, for me, something happened about 40 years ago to me that was, I think was the major transition, because I've gone from being a worker to an executive to my own business, back to working for somebody and selling a business, and then back in my own business again. So those were transitions. But 40 years ago, I found out what the real meaning of Easter was through an attorney. I was riding back and forth to work. He's legally blind. I had to drive him to work. So he was just sharing to me a little bit about the Bible and stuff. But it was just about 40 years ago that I learned that Easter wasn't about Easter eggs and bunnies anymore. That's what the real reason was. But what that did was it changed my filter as to how I looked at these 6 things. How I looked at money, relationships, work. That spiritual relationships, that connection with God changed my filter. And I think what I'm talking about, a frame of reference, it was from that point forward that my frame of reference changed. But that doesn't have to be just spirit. Just anything. What changes your frame of reference? What I learned was I was a little bit more selfish than I thought I was. And that improved my life with my wife. My wife and I have been married 45 happy years, and 45 out of 49 isn't bad. And everybody wants to know what were the bad 4 years, and we say an hour here, 20 minutes there, it all adds up, right? But I'm not so sure I'd be married today if I hadn't have made that, because I didn't realize how selfish I was and how in-looking I was at myself. I was very involved in sports and work and things, and that changed my life. We began to share our money a little bit with other people. Boy, that was hard for me early on. What do you mean? I like the old song, if 10% is good enough for Jesus, that ought to be good enough for Uncle Sam. But But as that filter changed, then my whole life changed. And so as a result of that, I've been able to work with a lot of people and encourage a lot of people, because I really found out what I'm about is not about management. I think my life is about encouraging other people. And I didn't know how to monetize that, but at the age of 42, I ended up in a career where this guy came along and taught me how to do that. So I think we have to have vision to apply all the things that I had you fill out here. The idea part is very important. Have a vision, and then start putting together, well, what do I value? How do I think about that? And move forward. What questions? There's the framework. Do you have any questions? Again, you guys are the experts. Yeah.
Where would you put inspiration in, spiritual inspiration? I work with a lot of people who have very strong testimonies. You just mentioned that, you feel like you get an idea that's not yours, so to speak. Would you consider that an event or an idea?
I don't think it matters. I think it's tangibly. I think it's both. I think sometimes that either the world will speak to you or God will speak to you, wherever you're coming from. But there's an idea that is coming externally. I believe it comes from God, but it's there, and then the inspiration is part of an idea. I think it grows. Inspired to do something. You guys that are in business had to be inspired to do something, right? I mean, something came. What was that inspiration? Well, I think I can do it. And I like people to look at significance, passion, skills, and talents. Those 4 things. When I wake up in the morning, what do I really want to do? Passion. That's the sunrise. The sunset is, at the end of the day, what's significance? What happened today? What do I do that brings significance into my life? That's the sunset. And then the idea, skills are things you can do. Talents are things that almost come naturally to you. And so that all wraps up into kind of the emotion and actions that you start analyzing the things that you do. And that's what I do with coaching, Jay, I'm sure you do too, is to get people to begin to understand that.
Well, how do you, this is a kind of a point of tension for me, how do you get the balance of letting things emerge and making things happen? Because I go through this process of feeling like I need to wait and let things emerge and develop, but then I get this thing inside of me, no, I got to happen if it's going to be, it's up to me, so on and so forth. Is that a tension that you've had to deal with?
Well, yeah, I think that tension's always there, and I think you have to know yourself to know where you're getting your inspiration, how do you move. I mean, I wanted to move. I get a lot of inspiration from my wife, actually, really, and truthful. I won't joke about that, because when she said wait a year, I was ready to move, and she said wait. So I think other people in our life are critical. Have you guys found that there's other people, like your father and some others, inspire you? But we have to do better at that. We have to bring more people into our lives. I think that's important. And for me, I prayed a lot. I see a lot of people and meet with people. These groups are important to us. I have a very good friend in Hong Kong. He came to me as life coaching, and he was very upset. Didn't know what to do. So we went through a process. He talked to a lot of people, and he ended up going to work for McDonald's in China. And he opened 160 stores in China for McDonald's and drove all over China. But the inspiration came from one other person. I think I gave him a little inspiration. But the idea is he didn't have confidence in what the natural talents he had, so we brought that out. That's why we need each other. I worked with a high school. I coached a high school baseball team with the coach, and this coach, every once in a while, he'd go around and he'd say, "Okay, you're in the middle of the room, third baseman," and so everybody would talk and say, "This is what I appreciate about John. This is what I appreciate." And everybody go around, and it'd be "I appreciate" meetings, and we don't do that enough in our families or in our businesses where we say, "I appreciate." What is it? Because that gets back to emotions and the idea of encouragement, that we need to encourage people and pull their ideas out. Questions? Or we're just about done, I think.
One more.
I'll have one more. Once you've made the transition, how do you stick with your transition decision?
Well, that leads to another transition. We decided at the end of 6 months that if we weren't making any money, we would take all of our funds and go to zero when I went into my own business. We wouldn't go into debt, but we'd go to zero. And so then the process of just checking on it. So, but I think you have to be prepared that there will be an event or something that says, I have to change again. So, okay.
Good.